The night of my mother-in-law's 80th birthday, my husband brought his mistress and their son to our family home, demanding a divorce in front of everyone. I didn't say a word, but then my son, Ethan, unexpectedly took the microphone and said, "First, I want to thank this woman. From now on, my father is her responsibility." I still remember that night with perfect clarity. It was supposed to be a normal birthday gala, but it became the night my entire life veered onto a completely different path. The 80th birthday party for my mother-in-law, Eleanor Harrison, was held at the Sterling Ballroom, the grandest venue in the city of Ridgedale. The Sterling was a place I'd heard about often, but had rarely set foot in. The ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, with large round tables draped in crimson silk arranged in 6 long rows. The guests were all prominent figures in Ridgedale's business community: CEOs, bank presidents, and a few acquaintances from local government. I sat at the head table, right next to Eleanor, holding a slightly warm sheet of paper in my hand. It was the tribute speech I had spent several nights writing. Eleanor had personally called me into her study, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Claire, tomorrow is my 80th. As David's wife and the eloquent one in the family, I need you to write a proper tribute speech for me." I simply nodded, knowing full well she had no affection for me, but I did it anyway. After 15 years as a Harrison daughter-in-law, I had grown accustomed to silence. "My name is Claire. My husband is David, and our son, Ethan, is 14. 15 years ago, I married into the Harrison family, and everyone said I was lucky. The Harrisons owned a major construction firm, Harrison Construction, and lived in a 3-story mansion in the heart of Ridgedale. But only those on the inside knew that the marriage was anything but the fairy tale it appeared to be. I sat with a straight back, my smile polite and measured. Eleanor wore a deep crimson designer gown, embroidered with silver cranes. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant chignon. She was smiling a lot tonight, but I could see the familiar glint of calculation behind that smile. She turned to me. "Claire, you've worked so hard all these years. The success of David's company today is largely thanks to you managing things behind the scenes." I gave a slight nod. "You're too kind, Eleanor." Inwardly, I felt a chill. I had heard such words before, and they were always followed by something unpleasant. Before I could say more, the grand double doors of the ballroom were pushed open forcefully. The sound echoed just as everyone was raising their glasses for a toast. All eyes turned to the entrance. David, my husband, strode in. He wore a dark gray tailored suit, his walk as fast and confident as ever. But one more glance told me this night would not be peaceful. His arm was wrapped around another woman, a young woman. She wore a white silk dress, her figure slender, her face pretty. Her belly had a slight curve, just enough for a discerning eye to recognize a pregnancy. But that wasn't what silenced the entire ballroom. Beside them stood a little boy, about 5 years old. He held David's hand, and a single look at the boy's face was enough for anyone to see he was a carbon copy of David. The chatter in the ballroom instantly died. The silence was so profound, I could hear my own heart pounding. David led the woman and child straight to the head table. He stood before Eleanor, and then, in front of everyone, he knelt. "Mom," his voice rang out clearly. "Today's your 80th birthday. I have 2 gifts I wanted to bring home to you." A murmur rippled through the guests. David pulled the little boy closer. "This is Leo, your grandson." He then gestured to the woman's stomach. "And in here is the second Harrison heir. She's 3 months along." At his words, Eleanor froze for a second, and then her face lit up. The joy was so apparent that she seemed to forget I was sitting right beside her. "Oh, my heavens!" she exclaimed, rushing to embrace the boy. "My grandson." She touched his face, his hands. "This nose, these eyes. He looks exactly like David." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Some people looked at me with pity, others with curiosity. I just sat there, motionless. The speech in my hand was now crumpled. The other woman bowed her head slightly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am," she said, her voice saccharine sweet. Only then did David turn to look at me. His eyes were as cold as if he were looking at a stranger. "Claire," he said slowly, "we've been married for 15 years. I don't want to make this ugly." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his jacket pocket. "These are the divorce papers." He placed them on the table. "Sign them." The room fell silent once more. David continued. "You've been a part of the Harrison family for 15 years, and you've done your part. I won't be unfair to you. The house in the suburbs, I'll leave it to you." His tone was decisive, as if this had been planned for a long time. Eleanor now chimed in, holding the little boy. Claire, you've been in this family for 15 years and only gave us Ethan. Now that David has a son to carry on the name, as the first daughter-in-law, you should be a little more gracious. Her words were soft, as if discussing the weather, but each one was like a razor cut. Just as I was about to stand, the person beside me moved. It was my son, Ethan. He had been silent the entire time. He was nearly as tall as I was, his features resembling mine more than David's. He was a quiet, reserved boy, but he had always been remarkably composed. Ethan stood up. He didn't run over to fight, nor did he cry. He simply walked straight to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. There was a spare microphone on a stand. He picked it up, and the sound of it turning on filled the room. Could I have everyone's attention for a moment? His voice was startlingly calm. David frowned. Ethan, put the microphone down. The adults are talking. But Ethan didn't look at him. He walked a slow circle around the other woman, then stood a few feet away from her. Holding the microphone, he enunciated each word clearly. First, I'd like to wish my grandmother a very happy 80th birthday, with many more to come. The crowd looked on, bewildered. Ethan paused for a second, then looked directly at the woman, a slight curve on his lips. Second, on behalf of my mother, I'd like to thank you. The entire ballroom was stunned. The woman herself was frozen. Ethan continued, his voice steady. For the past 15 years, my mother has managed this entire household, on top of bailing out my father's failing side projects. She's exhausted. If you love my father so much, then from now on, his meals, his health, his debts, they are all your responsibility. The room felt like it was about to explode. David shot to his feet. What did you just say? But Ethan remained calm. My father, right now, aside from his expensive suit and his handsome face, probably doesn't have enough money in his pocket to buy a lobster. At that moment, I finally stood up. I walked forward and stood in front of my son, shielding him. I looked at David, the man I had shared a bed with for 15 years. Then I said softly, Ethan is right, David. 3 days ago, you signed over 30% of your company's shares as collateral against a personal loan from my trust. Right now, you truly have nothing left. The color drained from David's face. The other woman also turned pale, and Eleanor, still holding the little boy, suddenly went rigid. I looked at all three of them and said quietly, and this is just my first birthday gift to the family. The story had only just begun. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear a spoon clinking against the glass. No one had expected a 14-year-old boy to utter words that would leave a room full of adults speechless. I stood in front of my son, feeling his hand lightly gripping the back of my dress. He wasn't shaking, but his breathing was heavier than usual. I knew he was forcing himself to stay calm. David stared at us as if he couldn't believe his ears, his face shifting from flushed to pale. Claire, what did you just say? I looked at him, my expression placid. You heard me perfectly well. I pulled out a chair and sat down, as if we were just having a normal family dinner conversation. 3 days ago, you signed a loan agreement with me for $15 million to cover the shortfall in the Riverbend project. I said slowly. In return, you pledged all your remaining shares in the company as collateral. Whispers began to spread through the ballroom. A few of David's business acquaintances started exchanging glances. David immediately snapped, "You're lying." But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. I didn't answer him. I simply opened the handbag I'd placed beside my chair and took out a thin file. I placed it on the table, the white paper stark against the crimson tablecloth. A copy of the contract, I said. The original is with my lawyer. All eyes immediately fixed on the file. Eleanor finally realized something was terribly wrong. She set the little boy down and picked up the papers with a trembling hand. She couldn't understand all the complex financial clauses, but the line item loan amount, $15 million, was enough to make her face lose all color. David, what is this? Her voice shook. David gritted his teeth. It's just an internal capital transfer. I let out a soft laugh. A capital transfer? Do you want me to also mention that the Riverbend project has been stalled for a month? As soon as I said it, someone in the crowd gasped softly. In Ridgedale, Harrison Construction's Riverbend project had been heavily advertised. If that project had problems, it was no small matter. David looked at me, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Claire. I cut him off. Did you really think I knew nothing? You took company funds to buy her a condo, and then you used project capital to cover your tracks. I glanced at the woman in the white dress. She had lost her earlier fragile demeanor. Her face was ashen. "Your name is Jessica, isn't it?" She flinched. "Ma'am, you're mistaken." Her voice trembled. I held her gaze for a moment before saying gently, "Don't call me ma'am. We're not that close." The murmuring in the room grew louder. Jessica suddenly grabbed David's arm. "David, this—" David shoved her hand away. He was no longer in the mood to pretend to be gentle. "Be quiet." Jessica stumbled back a step. The boy, Leo, clung to her dress in fear. I watched the scene with a hollow feeling in my chest. Once, David had held my hand in front of everyone and promised to protect me for the rest of my life. It turned out a man's promise was lighter than the wind. Ethan stood beside me, his eyes cold. He looked at David, his voice not loud but clear. "Dad, do you want to continue this?" David turned to his son. "Ethan, you are my son." Ethan met his gaze. "I know, but you forgot you were my father a long time ago." That sentence seemed to freeze the entire room. David's mouth opened, but no words came out. Eleanor suddenly slammed her hand on the table. "That's enough. Claire, do you want to make a scene so the whole city can laugh at the Harrison family?" I turned to look at her. In 15 years, I had heard that line countless times. The Harrison family, the Harrison honor, the Harrison reputation. But not once had anyone asked if I was in pain. I looked at Eleanor and said slowly, "Mom, I'm not the one causing a scene. The person embarrassing the Harrison family is your son." Her own words thrown back at her left, Eleanor, speechless. A few guests began to stand up. The birthday gala had now turned into a drama that no one had the appetite for. Just then, Jessica suddenly burst into tears. She clutched her stomach, tears streaming down her face. "David, say something. You promised you'd give me and our child a home." David turned to her, his face contorted. "Shut up." He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the wine glasses. "Weren't you the one who insisted on coming today?" Jessica froze, and the room erupted in a collective "oh." "So, today's events weren't entirely David's plan." Jessica stammered. But you said your wife was just a homemaker, that she knew nothing about the company." Ethan let out a soft, sharp laugh. "It wasn't loud, but many people heard it. And you actually believe that," he said. "My father is just the CEO in name only. For the last 3 years, my mother has been running the company." David spun around. "Be quiet." But it was too late. Several business figures in the room began nodding. In Ridgedale's business circles, it had been rumored for a while. The real force keeping Harrison Construction afloat was me. I said nothing more, just stood up. "My lawyer," I called out softly. The ballroom doors opened again. A middle-aged man in a suit walked in. He placed a folder on the table. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "as you have failed to repay the $15 million loan within the 3-day period, the family mansion you currently reside in and the luxury car registered in your name will now be processed as seized assets." Hearing this, Eleanor shrieked, "That's impossible." She pointed at me. "Claire, are you trying to kick your own mother-in-law out of her house?" I looked at her, devoid of any emotion. "Mom, that house is now part of the collateral. I'm only giving you 3 more days." The room buzzed again. 3 days. In just 3 days, the family that was once one of the wealthiest in this district would have to leave their mansion. David slumped into his chair, his face ghostly white. As for Jessica, she finally understood. The man she thought was a wealthy catch was, in fact, nearly bankrupt. She looked at David, her voice turning sharp. "Tell me, where's the mansion? Where's the money?" David screamed, "Shut your mouth." The atmosphere in the ballroom descended into chaos. I took Ethan's hand. "Let's go." Ethan nodded. Mother and son, we walked toward the exit. Behind us, the sounds of arguing continued. The 80th birthday gala had turned into a complete farce. As we stepped out of the hotel, the night air hit me. I took a deep breath, feeling as if I had just escaped a suffocating room I'd been trapped in for 15 years. Ethan stood beside me. He said quietly, "Mom, we're going to have a better life now." I looked at my son. For the first time in years, I truly felt a sense of relief. But I also knew this wasn't over. People like David don't accept defeat easily, and I knew he would be back. The car pulled away from the Sterling ballroom slowly. I sat in the back with Ethan beside me. Through the window, the streetlights of Ridgedale blurred into long streaks of light, like memories being swept away by the night wind. For the first part of the drive, we were both silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but but because too much had just happened. An 80th birthday party, a 15-year marriage, a seemingly stable family, all of it had just shattered in front of hundreds of people. Our driver, Michael, had been with me for years. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror and asked softly, "Miss Claire, are we going back to the house or to the waterfront condo?" I thought for a moment. The condo. Michael nodded without another question. I had bought the waterfront condo 2 years ago, initially just as a quiet workspace. Later, I had renovated part of it to use as a temporary residence when needed. I hadn't told David, nor had I told Eleanor. Living with the Harrisons, I had learned to keep some things for myself. The car drove on for a while. Ethan suddenly spoke, his voice low. "Mom." I turned to him. "Yes?" "She won't let this go," he said, referring to Eleanor. I looked into my son's eyes. At 14, he already possessed a clarity that many adults lacked. I nodded slightly. "I know. She's not the type to accept defeat," Ethan continued. I managed a faint smile. "That's why I prepared in advance." Ethan watched me for a few seconds, then asked, "When did you start preparing?" I leaned back against the seat. Outside, the river glittered with the reflection of city lights. "About 2 years ago." Ethan frowned slightly. 2 years. I nodded. "The day I found out your father bought that condo for Jessica." He fell silent. I remembered that day vividly. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was at the bank to sign loan documents for the company. While waiting, a clerk casually mentioned a large wire transfer from the company account to a luxury condo development. The name on the receiving end was Jessica. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I started digging, and the truth slowly unraveled. David wasn't just having an affair. He was using company money to support his mistress. I didn't cause a scene back then. I just started documenting every transaction, every contract, every document David signed. I remember my father's words to me before I got married. "Claire, always have an escape plan, especially in a marriage." The car stopped in front of the condominium building. Michael got out to open the door for us. The river breeze was cool and refreshing. Ethan stepped out first, then turned to offer me his hand. It was a small gesture, but it warmed my heart. "Are you tired?" I asked my son. Ethan shook his head. "No." He paused, then added, "I just feel lighter." I knew what he meant. A child growing up in a family filled with pretense is often more exhausted than the adults. We had just stepped into the lobby when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "David." I stared at it for a few seconds, then declined the call. Not 10 seconds later, it rang again. Still David. Ethan looked at me. "Aren't you going to answer?" I shook my head. No need. But the phone kept ringing. A third time, a fourth. Finally, I answered. David's voice came through instantly. "Claire." The background was noisy. He was probably still outside the hotel. "Where are you?" "That's none of your business," I replied calmly. "Get back here right now," he said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." I stepped into the elevator with Ethan. The doors slid shut. "I think we've said enough for one night." David's voice turned into a snarl. "Claire, don't you dare think you've won. I still have the company, my connections." I laughed softly. "David?" I said his name calmly. "Do you remember the import-export subsidiary?" The other end of the line went silent. I continued, "You sold it a month ago to get money to buy Jessica a designer handbag. The buyer was my brother." David immediately roared. "What did you say?" The elevator stopped at the 16th floor. Ethan and I stepped out. "Didn't you read the contract? That company now belongs to the Miller family." The Miller family was my family. David was breathing heavily. I could hear him slam something. "You planned all of this, didn't you?" I stood in front of my apartment door. "No. You planned this for yourself." I paused, then added softly, "You just didn't realize it." I hung up. The apartment door opened to a quiet, warmly lit space. Ethan went in first. He looked around. "Mom, have you had this place for a while?" "Almost a year." He nodded. "I like it here." I set my purse on the table. Just then, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't David, but an unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice came through. "Miss Claire?" I recognized it immediately. It was Jessica. "Yes?" I said. She spoke very quietly. Can I meet with you for a minute?" I was a bit surprised. "What do you want?" There was a pause on her end, and she said, "I know you hate me, but there's something you don't know." I didn't answer right away. In the room, Ethan was pouring a glass of water. I watched my son, then asked, "What is it?" Jessica's voice trembled. "The baby I'm carrying. It's not David's." I froze. I had alluded to this at the party, but it was just a suspicion based on David's medical records. Now, Jessica was admitting it herself. I asked, "You called me just to tell me that?" Jessica choked back a sob. "No. I wanted to tell you. That man is coming back." I frowned. "Who?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Vance." The name made me go silent. In Ridgedale, many people knew of Vance. A wealthy but notorious man. I asked slowly, "You know him?" Jessica started crying. "I used to work at one of his nightclubs." I was beginning to understand. This story was more complicated than I had thought. Jessica continued, "Miss Claire, Vance won't let it go if he finds out I'm pregnant. I need money to leave Ridgedale." I looked out the window. The dark river glittered with lights. This was all just beginning. "Where are you now?" I asked. "Outside the hotel," she replied. I was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Wait there." I hung up. Ethan looked at me. "Mom, where are you going?" I put my coat back on. "Back to the hotel." Ethan frowned. "For her?" I nodded. "Yes." "Do you trust her?" he asked. I looked at my son. "No. But I need to know the truth." Ethan stood up. "I'm coming with you." I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Because I knew the night was far from over, and the name Vance might just be the real storm heading for us all. I stood by the apartment door for a few seconds before turning back to grab my car keys. The Ridgedale night had grown colder, the wind from the river now carrying a damp chill typical of the late rainy season. Ethan, wearing his jacket, stood beside me. His expression was as calm as ever, but I knew his mind was racing. "Are you sure you want to come with me?" I asked. Ethan nodded immediately. "I don't want you to go alone." His simple answer warmed my heart. Since he was little, Ethan rarely showed his emotions, but when he did say something, he meant it. We went down to the parking garage. Michael hadn't left yet. He must have guessed I wasn't finished for the night. "Miss Claire, where to now?" he asked. "Back to the Sterling." Michael looked surprised, but didn't ask any more questions. He held the door for us. The car turned around, heading back the way we had just come. The streetlights stretched into long, pale, yellow ribbons. Inside the car, after a long silence, Ethan spoke up. "Mom, do you think Jessica is telling the truth?" I stared out the window and answered slowly, "I don't know yet." He pressed on. "If she is this Mr. Vance really that dangerous?" I didn't answer immediately. In Ridgedale's business world, everyone knew the name Vance. Not because he owned the biggest company, but because of how he did business nothing like a typical entrepreneur. He started with a chain of high-end nightclubs, then moved into real estate, getting embroiled in numerous disputes along the way. People said he had powerful, complicated connections. More importantly, he wasn't the type to let things go. I turned to Ethan. "He's not someone to be taken lightly." Ethan fell silent. After a moment, he said, "Then you shouldn't be going." I smiled faintly. "But I have to know what's happening." The car pulled up in front of the Sterling Ballroom. The scene was drastically different from before. Most of the guests had left, with only a few cars scattered in the parking lot. From a distance, I could see 3 figures standing near the entrance: David, Eleanor, and Jessica. The little boy, Leo, stood next to Jessica, his eyes red from crying. The tension between them was palpable even from afar. As we stepped out of the car, all 3 of them turned. David was the first to react. "Claire." He strode towards me. "What are you doing back here?" His voice was hoarse, clear evidence of a recent, heated argument. I calmly replied, "I came to see Jessica." David froze. "Here?" Jessica looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. Eleanor, however, immediately spoke up. "Claire, how long are you going to keep making a scene?" I looked at her. "Don't worry, Eleanor. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to hear what she has to say." David scoffed. "You believe her?" I ignored him and turned to Jessica. "You said you wanted to see me." Jessica nodded. She took Leo's hand and said softly, "Can we talk in private?" David immediately snapped, "No." He grabbed Jessica's arm. "She's trying to trick you." Jessica yanked her arm away. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't appear weak. "David, this is about me." David was taken aback. Watching them, I understood something else. There was likely never any real love between them, only mutual exploitation. I I said to Ethan, "Stay here with Michael for a minute." Ethan nodded. I walked with Jessica to the side of the parking lot, where the lighting was dimmer and there were fewer people. She stood silently for a few moments, as if gathering her courage. "Miss Claire, I know you don't like me." I got straight to the point. "What do you want to say?" Jessica looked down. "The baby. It's true. It isn't David's." I looked at her. "You told me that on the phone." She nodded. "But you don't know who the father is." I said it for her. "Mr. Vance." Jessica trembled. The name clearly terrified her. "You know him?" "I know of him." Jessica took a deep breath. "I used to work at one of his nightclubs. I was only 22. I listened silently. He was a regular customer. At first, I thought he was just another client. Then he started giving me money." Her voice grew smaller. "Things got out of hand." "Did you meet David after that?" I asked. Jessica shook her head. "No. I met David later, at a friend's party. He told me he didn't have a son. I thought, if I had a son with him, my life would be different." I wasn't surprised. Stories like hers weren't uncommon in Ridgedale. But I still asked, "And the 5-year-old boy?" Jessica looked toward Leo, who was standing in the distance. Tears welled up in her eyes. "He's Vance's son." I was silent for a few seconds. It confirmed my suspicions. "He doesn't know," Jessica continued. "I left the club before he was born. Then I met David. So now you're afraid he'll find out," I stated. Jessica nodded frantically. "He just came back to Ridgedale. His people have been asking about me." I looked her straight in the eye. "What do you want from me?" Jessica choked back a sob. "I need money to get out of here." I said nothing. The night wind blew stronger. In the distance, David was watching us, his face full of suspicion. "You can hate me," Jessica pleaded, "but the boy is innocent. I just want him to have a safe life." I glanced at Leo. He was standing next to Ethan, still looking scared. Ethan was saying something to him, probably trying to comfort him. I turned back to Jessica. "And you think I'll help you?" Jessica lowered her head. "I don't know. But you're the only one who can." I remained silent for a long time. Finally, I said, "Get in my car." Jessica looked up, surprised. "Miss Claire, you'll help me?" I looked at her. "Not yet. But I need to hear the full story." Just then, a black sedan pulled up not far from us. The door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped out. He wore a long coat, his build tall, his gaze sharp and cold. The moment Jessica saw him, her entire body started to shake. Mr. Vance." I turned. The man's eyes were fixed on us. I knew then that this night was not going to end peacefully. The story had just taken another sharp turn. The man who stepped out of the black sedan moved without haste. He closed the car door softly, but each step he took on the pavement in front of the hotel seemed to make the air grow heavier. The warm light from the hotel lobby cast shadows on his face, highlighting sharp, cold features and deep-set eyes, the kind of eyes that were used to seeing through people with a single glance. Jessica, standing beside me, was trembling from head to toe. I could hear her sharp, panicked breaths. Miss Claire." Her voice was so shaky, it was barely audible. That's Mr. Vance." I had already guessed. But when the man stopped a few feet away from us and looked directly at Jessica, I could feel the palpable pressure he exuded. In Ridgedale, few people dared to look Vance in the eye. He stared at Jessica for a long moment before speaking. "Jessica." His voice was deep and slow. Just one word, but it made Jessica flinch as if she wanted to retreat. "It's been a while." Jessica clutched her dress, not daring to meet his gaze. "Hello, Mr. Vance." Vance gave a faint smile, one completely devoid of warmth. "I heard you were back in Ridgedale. I didn't expect to run into you so soon." His gaze then shifted to me. "And you are?" I met his look calmly. "My name is Claire." Vance's brow furrowed slightly. "Claire." He thought for a moment, then his expression changed. "Ah, the Harrison daughter-in-law." Clearly, he knew who I was. It wasn't surprising. Ridgedale wasn't that big. The established business families all knew of one another. Vance took another step closer. "You're acquainted with Jessica?" "We just met tonight," I replied directly. He chuckled softly. "Then you don't know much about her." Jessica suddenly spoke, her voice urgent. "Mr. Vance, I left your establishment a long time ago." Vance looked at her, his eyes not angry, but carrying a chill that ran down one's spine. "Left?" He repeated slowly. "You disappeared for years without a word." Jessica bit her lip. I had personal matters to attend to." Vance said nothing more. His gaze slowly drifted to the little boy, Leo, who was standing next to Ethan. The moment Leo saw him, he immediately hid behind Ethan. Seeing that reaction, I knew Jessica had been telling the truth. That boy was definitely connected to this man. Vance asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Who's the boy?" Jessica didn't answer. I saw her hand shaking violently. David, who had been watching from the hotel entrance, now strode over. He probably didn't recognize who the man was. "Who are you?" David said, stepping between Vance and Jessica. "This is a private family matter." Vance looked David up and down, his eyes filled with a subtle disdain. "You're David Harrison?" David frowned. "You know me?" Vance smiled faintly. "I've heard of you. CEO of Harrison Construction." David straightened his back slightly. "That's right." Vance continued, his voice still calm. "But I've also heard your company has run into some trouble recently." David's face paled. News of his company's problems had clearly spread. He growled, "That's none of your business." Vance ignored him. He looked back at Jessica. "How old is the boy?" Jessica shook her head frantically. "He has nothing to do with you." Vance's brow tightened. For the first time, I saw a genuine coldness in his eyes. "Jessica, do you really think I haven't been looking into it?" His question made Jessica take a step back. "What? What do you want?" Vance looked directly at Leo. "I just want to know if he's my son." The air in front of the hotel instantly grew thick with tension. David whipped his head around to face Jessica. "What is he talking about?" Jessica wouldn't look at him. David enunciated each word. "That boy isn't my son?" Jessica remained silent. Only the sound of Leo's soft crying could be heard. David looked like he was about to lose his mind. "Jessica!" He grabbed her arm. "Tell me the truth." Jessica sobbed. I wasn't sure." David dropped her arm as if he'd been electrocuted. He stared at the boy for a few seconds, then turned to Vance. "What nonsense are you spouting?" Vance didn't rush to answer. He took out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then held it out in front of David. "I had someone run a check." David looked at the screen, and his face immediately turned ghostly white. I didn't know what was on it, but it was clearly enough to make him understand the truth. He staggered back. "Impossible." Vance put his phone away. "I'm not certain yet. Just a suspicion." He looked at Jessica. "If we want to know for sure, all it takes is a simple test." Jessica was sobbing uncontrollably. "Just leave me alone." Vance watched her for a few seconds, and then his tone changed, no longer as cold as before. "What are you afraid of? If he is my son, I'll acknowledge him." That statement surprised all of us. David let out a bitter, incredulous laugh. "You make it sound so easy. I've been raising another man's child for 4 years, and now I find out he's not mine." He turned to me. "Claire, you see? This is the woman you were just about to help." I looked at David. "I never said I was going to help her." David sneered. "You're always like this, always acting so righteous." I didn't respond. I just said, "David, stop. You've lost enough tonight. Don't lose what's left of your dignity." David stared at me, his expression a complex mix of anger and helplessness. Vance then turned to me. "Miss Claire, I hear you're the one holding David Harrison's debt." I nodded. "That's correct." Vance said very slowly, "I can pay it for him." His offer stunned everyone. David immediately looked at him. "Are you serious?" Vance smiled. "I don't do things for free." He looked at Jessica. "In exchange, Jessica comes with me." The atmosphere froze. Jessica looked horrified. "No." She hugged Leo tightly. "Don't even think about it." Vance didn't get angry. He just said calmly, "You should think carefully. You can't hide from me in Ridgedale." Watching this unfold, a different thought began to form in my mind. Perhaps this wasn't just about Jessica. Perhaps this was part of a much larger game. I looked at Vance. "Mr. Vance." He turned to me. "Yes?" I spoke slowly. "If you want to talk business, we should find a more private place." Vance's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you want to talk about?" I held his gaze. "Something that I believe we are both very interested in." Vance's eyes immediately changed. He studied me for a long time, then gave a slight nod. "You're starting to get interesting, Miss Harrison." The Ridgedale night was still long, and I knew the real chess match had only just begun. The lights of the Sterling ballroom were still on, but the atmosphere out front was a world away from the earlier chaos. The luxury cars were nearly all gone, leaving only a few scattered figures. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees lining the street was starkly audible, as if the entire city had fallen silent to watch what would happen next. I stood opposite Vance. He was half a head taller than me, with a straight posture and an unnervingly calm gaze. Men like him didn't need to say much. Their presence alone was enough to put others on guard. Vance looked at me for a few seconds and said, "What did you have in mind?" I turned to Michael. "Take the children back to the condo first." Ethan immediately protested. "Mom, I placed a hand on my son's shoulder. "Go home first." Ethan looked at me for a long moment. He knew my resolve. Once my mind was made up, I wouldn't change it. Finally, he nodded. "I'll wait for you." I smiled faintly. "Okay." Jessica looked at Leo, her face full of anxiety. "You go with Ethan, okay?" Leo gave a tiny nod and took Ethan's hand. Michael led the two children to the car. The car pulled away slowly, taking them from the scene. Now, only 5 of us remained. Myself, Vance, David, Jessica, and Eleanor. Eleanor stood behind David, her face still pale from the night's revelations. Vance looked at me. "You wanted to speak privately." I nodded. The coffee shop across the street. Vance glanced in the direction I indicated. A small cafe was still open, its windows glowing with a soft, warm light. He nodded. "All right." David immediately spoke up. "Wait a minute." He stepped forward. "Claire, what are you planning?" I looked at him. "This doesn't concern you." David sneered. "You think you can just team up with him?" I replied calmly. "At least I know who I'm dealing with." My words left David speechless. Vance watched us for a moment, then turned and walked towards the coffee shop. I followed behind him. I could hear Eleanor pulling at David's arm. "David, what on earth is going on?" David didn't answer, just watched me go with a look of fury and confusion. The coffee shop was nearly empty, save for a couple in a far corner. Soft music played quietly. I chose a table by the window. Vance sat opposite me and ordered 2 black coffees. When the server left, he said, "You can speak now." I looked him straight in the eye. "You want the boy?" Vance shrugged. "If he's my son." I nodded. "But that's not all you want." His brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" I said very slowly. "You want to control Jessica." Vance was silent for a few seconds, then he let out a soft laugh. "You're smarter than I thought." I didn't smile. "She used to work for you. She knows too much." Vance watched me. "So you think I want to silence her?" I didn't answer directly. "I'm just stating what I see." The coffee arrived, steam rising between us. Vance picked up his cup and took a sip. "What do you want?" It was a direct question. I gave a direct answer. "I want you to leave Jessica and her children alone." Vance put his cup down. "And in return?" I looked at him. "I'll give you what you really want." Vance's expression shifted slightly. "And what do you think I want?" I tilted my head. "Harrison Construction." He didn't speak, but I saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. I continued. "You've been eyeing that company for a long time, but you didn't want to make a direct move." Vance smiled faintly. "Have you been investigating me?" "No need to investigate," I said calmly. "One only needs to observe." I paused. "You're a man who likes control, and David is currently at his weakest." Vance nodded slowly. "You're right." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "But why would you help me?" I looked out the window. Across the street, David was still standing in front of the hotel. The yellow light cast long shadows, making him look years older. 15 years, I said. For 15 years, I was his wife. Vance said nothing. "I don't want to see him destroy everything and then walk away as if nothing happened." Vance chuckled softly. "You're more ruthless than I imagined." I looked back at him. "So are you." We looked at each other for a few seconds in silence. Finally, Vance asked, "What do you want me to do?" "Keep Jessica and the children safe," I said. "As for Harrison Construction, I'll hand it over to you." Vance frowned. "What right do you have?" I took a file from my handbag and placed it on the table. "The 30% of shares David pledged to me. I already owned 40%. Vance looked at the file. "So, 70%. I nodded. "Enough to make all the decisions." Vance was silent for a long time. Then he laughed. "Claire, you're a truly formidable woman." I didn't deny it. He pushed the file back towards me. "All right." "I agree." Just then, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "David." I glanced at it, then answered. His voice was hoarse. "Claire, I know where you are." I wasn't surprised. "So?" David spoke very slowly. "If you think you've won, you're mistaken. I remained silent. He continued, "You've forgotten one thing. I'm still Ethan's father." My hand tightened around the phone. "What are you trying to say?" David laughed. "Tomorrow, I'm filing for full custody." Before I could reply, he hung up. The cafe fell silent again. Vance looked at me. "Trouble?" I put my phone down, a feeling of unease settling in for the first time. I knew David could lose money, lose the company. But if he targeted Ethan, this game was about to become far more dangerous. I looked out the window. The Ridgedale night was far from over, and the real war, it seemed, had just begun. I set my phone down on the table, but the calm I had felt moments before was gone. David's last words echoed in my mind. "I'm still Ethan's father." It wasn't an empty threat. Legally, both parents have rights to their child. If David was truly determined to drag this through the courts, things would get much more complicated. Vance watched me for a moment. "Your ex-husband?" I nodded. "He's going to sue for custody of our son." Vance raised an eyebrow. "The boy from earlier?" "Yes." He was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "How old is he?" 14. Vance leaned back in his chair. At that age, the court usually considers the child's wishes. I knew that, but I also knew David wasn't one for making idle threats. If he had brought it up, he must have a plan. I looked out the window. The area in front of the Sterling was almost deserted now. David and Eleanor were gone. They had probably left, but I knew he wouldn't stop there. Vance took another sip of his coffee. "Are you scared?" I looked at him. "No, but I don't like being dragged into dirty fights." Vance gave a faint, cynical smile. "You're already in the game. You can't stay clean now." I didn't argue, because he was right. Once David decided to retaliate, he would use any means necessary. Vance stood up. "You should get some rest. I'll have someone keep an eye on Jessica." I nodded. "Thank you." He paused and looked at me for a second. "Don't thank me yet. Our partnership has only just begun." I understood his meaning. In business, there's no such thing as unconditional help. Vance left the cafe first, and his black sedan quickly disappeared into the sparse late-night traffic. I sat for a few more minutes before getting up. The night air had grown colder. It was nearly midnight when I got back to the condo. Ethan was still awake. He was sitting on the sofa with a book open in front of him, but it was clear he wasn't reading. When he saw me walk in, he stood up immediately. "Mom." I took off my coat and laid it on a chair. "Why are you still up?" Ethan looked at me. "I was waiting for you." I walked over and gently ruffled his hair. "I'm sorry." "It's okay." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then asked, "You met with Mr. Vance?" I nodded. "Yes." He was quiet for a few seconds. "What's he like?" I thought for a moment. "Hard to read." Ethan nodded slowly. "Do you trust him?" I sat down on the sofa. "No. But I know what he wants." Ethan watched me intently. "You're playing a high-stakes game, aren't you?" I let out a soft laugh. "You sound just like your grandfather." He shrugged. "Grandpa always told me that in business, you have to think several moves ahead." I looked at my son, a wave of pride and sorrow washing over me. A 14-year-old boy should be worrying about school and friends, but because of the adult's mess, he had been forced to grow up too soon. Ethan looked at me. "Mom, is Dad really going to sue you?" I didn't want to hide it from him. "It's possible." Ethan was silent for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "I won't go with him." I looked at him. "You don't have to worry. Whatever happens, I will protect you." Ethan nodded, but I could see his mind was still troubled. I barely slept that night. Around 3 a.m., my phone vibrated. It was a text from my lawyer. "Claire, David Harrison's counsel just filed a motion with the city court. The petition is for full custody and a challenge to the validity of the $15 million loan." Reading the message, I wasn't surprised. David had moved faster than I'd expected. In just one night, I got up and walked out onto the balcony. The city was quiet at 3 a.m., with only a few cars passing on the street below. I remembered the early years of my marriage to David. He wasn't the man he was now. He used to tell me that family was the most important thing. I don't know when everything changed. The next morning, just as I was getting ready to take Ethan to school, the doorbell rang. Michael opened it to find 2 men in suits. One of them held up a badge. "We're from David Harrison's law firm." I walked to the door. "What is it?" The man handed me an envelope. "This is the official notice." I opened it. Inside was a copy of the lawsuit. David was petitioning the court to temporarily freeze some of my assets and formally review my fitness as a parent. Ethan stood behind me. He looked at the papers, then at me. "Mom, he really did it." I folded the document. Yes. Ethan asked calmly. So, what are you going to do? I looked at my son and said slowly, I'm going to show your father that some things can't be taken just because you want them. Ethan gave a slight nod. There were no tears in his eyes, only a resolve that mirrored my own. I knew that from this day forward, this fight was no longer just between me and David. It was a fight to protect the small family I had left. And I also knew that while David had just made his move, he had no idea I was already several steps ahead. That morning, a light rain fell over Ridgedale. The small drops streaked down the car window like thin, endless threads. I sat in the back with Ethan beside me. He was in his school uniform, his backpack resting neatly on his lap. His face was calm, but his eyes were more somber than usual. We weren't going to school today. Today was the first hearing at the courthouse. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, had called early that morning. He said David's side was demanding an emergency mediation session, citing the urgency of the custody and asset dispute. The car stopped in front of the Ridgedale City Courthouse, an old but imposing gray building. Wide steps led up to the main entrance. There weren't many people coming and going, but every face wore a tense expression. Michael opened the car door for us. Miss Claire, I'll wait here. I nodded. Ethan got out first and waited for me. As we walked up the steps, I saw David. He was standing under the awning, wearing a black suit, his hair neatly combed as it always was back when he was CO. Beside him stood Eleanor and a middle-aged man, presumably his lawyer. When David saw us, his expression immediately turned cold. Eleanor also looked at me, her face no longer arrogant, but still filled with resentment. Ethan gently squeezed my hand. Mom, I'm okay. I nodded. Let's go. We entered the courthouse lobby. Mr. Thompson was already waiting. He wore a gray suit and glasses, his demeanor composed. Claire. He glanced at Ethan and nodded. You came too, young man. Ethan replied politely. Hello, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson placed a hand on his shoulder. Today, you just need to speak the truth about what you think. Ethan nodded. Yes, sir. The mediation room was on the second floor. It was a small room with a long table in the center. A middle-aged judge sat at the head of the table, with a court clerk beside him. David and his lawyer sat on one side. Mr. Thompson and I sat opposite them, with Ethan beside me. The judge looked around the room and began. Today, we are here to address two issues. First, the asset dispute, and second, the custody of Ethan Harrison. His voice was calm but firm, making it clear this was a serious matter. David's lawyer spoke first. Your Honor, my client alleges that the $15 million loan agreement between Mr. Harrison and Miss Harrison contains numerous irregularities. We request a review of its legality. Mr. Thompson gave a slight smile. We have submitted the complete, notarized contract bearing Mr. Harrison's signature. He placed a file on the table. It's all in order. The judge flipped through a few pages and nodded. The court will review this matter later. He looked at David. Now, let's discuss custody. David immediately sat up straighter. Your Honor, I am Ethan's father. I have the right to care for and raise my son. I said nothing. The judge turned to Ethan. Young man, you're 14 years old, correct? Ethan nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Who do you want to live with? Ethan answered without hesitation. I want to live with my mother. The response was unequivocal. David immediately interjected. Your Honor, he's still young and easily influenced by his mother. His lawyer added, my client believes Miss Harrison is not a fit parent, given that she is embroiled in a major financial dispute. Mr. Thompson calmly rebutted. Miss Harrison has a stable income and clear assets. There is no reason to suggest she is unfit. David looked at me, his eyes full of challenge. Then he said something that silenced the entire room. Your Honor, I have one more thing to add. The judge looked at him. Proceed. David took a deep breath. I have reason to suspect that Ethan is not my biological son. The statement made me freeze. The room fell utterly silent. Ethan turned to look at David, his expression one of utter disbelief. Before I could speak, Mr. Thompson interjected. Mr. Harrison, you should be very careful with your words. David ignored him, his gaze fixed on me. Claire, can you say for sure that he is? My hands clenched into fists. What are you implying? David gave a cold laugh. 15 years ago, when you were pregnant with Ethan, we had a huge fight. You went back to your parents' house for nearly 3 months. The room was still. He continued, who knows what happened during that time? I felt my heart pound, not with fear, but with the realization that David was willing to hurt his own son to get at me. Ethan sat motionless. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Thompson stood up. "Your Honor, this is a baseless accusation." David immediately retorted. "I demand a DNA test." The words hung heavy in the air. The judge looked at me. "Miss Harrison, do you have any response?" I looked at David, the man who was my husband for 15 years. The man who held Ethan when he was a newborn, now using our child as a weapon. I spoke slowly and clearly. "I agree." David seemed taken aback, likely not expecting such a quick response. I looked him straight in the eye. "If you want to test, we'll do it. But you should remember one thing." I paused. "Once the truth is revealed, there will be no turning back for you." David sneered. "I don't need to turn back." The judge tapped his gavel lightly on the table. "The court grants the request for a DNA test." Ethan remained still. I turned to him. "Are you okay?" He looked at me, his eyes surprisingly calm. "Mom, I don't care." I squeezed his hand, because I knew that no matter the result, Ethan was my son. But I also understood that David had just played a vicious card, one that could upend everything. This battle had just entered a much more dangerous phase. The mediation room remained silent after the judge announced the decision for the DNA test. The air was so thick you could hear the clerk's pen scratching across the pages of the file. David sat opposite me, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, his gaze a mixture of provocation and anticipation. He probably believed that just by casting this doubt, he had thrown me into turmoil. But I was more worried about Ethan. I glanced at my son. He was still sitting perfectly straight, his hands on his knees, his expression so composed it was impossible to guess what he was thinking. The judge looked at Ethan. "You don't need to be anxious, young man. The test is simply to clarify the facts." Ethan nodded. "I understand, Your Honor." His voice didn't waver, but I knew this couldn't be easy for him. "Mr. Thompson leaned over and whispered to me, "Claire, this won't significantly affect the custody ruling as long as Ethan still wishes to live with you." I nodded. "I know. But I understood David's goal wasn't just to win custody. It was to destroy everything." The mediation session ended sooner than I expected. The court instructed us to go to the city's forensic lab that afternoon to provide samples. As we walked out of the room, David strode up to me. "Claire." I stopped. "Is there something else?" He looked me straight in the eye. "You're not scared at all, are you?" "Scared of what?" I asked back. He laughed faintly. "Of the truth." I looked at him. "Do you really think you're seeking the truth?" He didn't answer. Eleanor stood behind him, her face a mask of tension and worry. "David, does it really have to come to this?" David turned to her. "Mom, can't you see? She always acts so high and mighty. I just want to know the truth." Eleanor looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Perhaps only now was she realizing how far this had gone. Ethan, standing beside me, suddenly spoke. "Dad." David seemed startled. "What? Do you really want to know?" Ethan asked. David frowned. "What kind of question is that?" Ethan looked directly at him. "What if I'm not your son?" The question silenced the entire hallway. David scoffed. "Then that just makes things clearer." Ethan gave a slight nod. "I understand." He said nothing more, but I saw something shift in his eyes, as if a door inside him had just closed for good. That afternoon, we went to the forensic lab, a small building near the city hospital. It was clean and quiet inside. A lab technician led us into a room to collect the samples. The process was simple: a buccal swab from David and one from Ethan. It was over in minutes. The technician told us the results would be ready in 2 days. When we left the lab, the sun was starting to break through the clouds. The puddles from the morning rain reflected the pale yellow sky. David stood at the entrance and turned to me. "In 2 days, we'll know." I didn't reply. Ethan took my hand. "Mom, I want to go home." I nodded. "Let's go." Michael's car was already waiting. As we got in, my phone rang. The caller ID was Vance. I answered. "Mr. Vance." His voice was deep. "I heard you were at the courthouse today." I was a little surprised. News travels fast. Vance chuckled softly. "Ridgedale is a small town. I also heard he demanded a DNA test." I looked out the window. "That's right." He was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Are you sure?" I knew what he was asking. I replied calmly, "I'm sure." Vance said slowly, "Then he just dug his own grave." I smiled faintly. Perhaps. He continued. You should be prepared. I suspect he'll try something else. I wasn't surprised. I knew that. When I hung up, Ethan looked at me. Was that Mr. Vance? Yes. What did he say? I thought for a moment. He said your father won't stop. Ethan nodded. I think so too. The car crossed the bridge over the Ridgedale River, the water below sparkling in the afternoon sun. Ethan stared out the window for a long time, then said, Mom. Yes? What if the results aren't what we think? I turned to look at him. What have you been thinking? Ethan was quiet for a few seconds. I was just thinking. Dad was so ready to say that in front of a judge. Maybe he's certain. I placed my hand on his shoulder. You are my son. Ethan looked at me, and his expression softened. Yes. He nodded. That's enough. I turned back to look at the road ahead. 2 days. In just 2 days, the truth would be revealed. But I knew that no matter the outcome, this war was not over. Because David was not the type to accept defeat, and neither was I. The 2 days waiting for the DNA results felt longer than I could have imagined. Ridgedale was as noisy as ever. Cars still streamed down the familiar streets. But for me, everything felt stretched out, distorted. Calls from my lawyer, stacks of legal documents, rumors spreading through the business community, it all revolved around one thing. The Harrison family was broken. And today, everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. On the morning of the 3rd day, Mr. Thompson called me. Claire, the lab has the results. I was standing on the balcony of my condo, looking down at the river below. Hearing his words, I simply replied, We're going straight to the courthouse, aren't we? Yes. They've sent the results directly to the judge. I walked back into the living room. Ethan was at the table, eating breakfast. He still kept his habit of waking up early, making his own cereal. His face was calm, but I knew he was waiting too. Mom, is it today? I nodded. Yes. He took a bite of his toast and chewed slowly. After a moment, he said, I'm not worried. I looked at him. Really? He shrugged. I already told you. I'm your son. His words made my heart soften. We arrived at the courthouse at 9 a.m. The second-floor hallway was more crowded than last time. I spotted a few business acquaintances from Ridgedale standing in the distance, likely having heard about the hearing. David was already there. He stood next to Eleanor, his face looking tired, but his eyes were still calculating. When he saw Ethan and me, he just stared, saying nothing. We entered the room. The judge was already seated. On the table in front of him was a large, sealed envelope. I looked at that envelope. Inside it was the answer to everything. The judge surveyed the room. Let's begin. He opened the envelope and took out the report. The room fell silent. Even the rustling of papers sounded loud. David sat up straight, his hands flat on the table. Eleanor gripped her son's arm, her face tense. Ethan sat beside me, his back straight. The judge read clearly. The results of the DNA analysis between Mr. David Harrison and Ethan Harrison show. He paused for a beat. That the two share a biological parent-child relationship with a probability of 99.99%. The tension in the room seemed to dissipate, as if everyone had just exhaled. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. I had never doubted the result, but hearing it confirmed still brought a wave of relief. Ethan glanced at me, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. David, however, was completely frozen. His face went from flushed to ashen. Impossible, he mumbled. His lawyer was equally surprised. David, this is the official result. David shot to his feet. It can't be. There must be a mistake. The judge tapped his gavel lightly on the table. Mr. Harrison, this lab is a state-accredited facility. The results are legally binding. David stared at me, his eyes filled with fury. I simply met his gaze with calm. Just then, Ethan spoke. Dad. The whole room turned to look at him. He said softly, Now you know the truth. David clenched his fists, not answering. Eleanor let out a sharp sigh of relief. Oh, thank God. She looked at Ethan, her expression a mix of relief and confusion. But it wasn't over. The judge put the paper down and continued. Now that this matter is settled, the court will consider the issue of custody based on the current circumstances. Mr. Thompson stood up. Your Honor, Ethan has clearly expressed his wish to live with his mother. David immediately objected. I have rights, too. The judge looked at him. Mr. Harrison, your current financial situation is under significant dispute. David gritted his teeth. but I'm still his father. At that moment, the door to the room suddenly opened. Everyone turned. A man walked in, dressed in a black coat, tall, with sharp, cold eyes. It was Vance. I wasn't surprised to see him, but David was completely stunned. What? What are you doing here? Vance walked in calmly. I'm here as a witness. A murmur went through the room. And who are you, sir? The judge asked. Vance handed over his business card. My name is Vance. The judge glanced at the card and nodded. What do you wish to say? Vance looked at David. I just happen to know something relevant to Mr. Harrison's ability to provide for his son. David immediately snarled. What nonsense are you talking about? Vance didn't look at him. He addressed the judge directly. I have evidence that Mr. Harrison is heavily in debt to several other investors. David's face turned pale. I object. Vance took a file from his coat pocket. These are loan agreements from 3 other firms. He placed them on the table, and they are all past due. The room erupted in whispers. The judge took the documents and quickly scanned them. He looked at David. Mr. Harrison, is this true? David was speechless. Eleanor stared at her son, her face white. David, you took out more loans? David lowered his head. The answer was obvious. Vance glanced at me, his expression unreadable. I knew he had just played his card at the perfect moment. The judge set the file down. Given this financial situation, the court will have to review this matter very carefully. David slumped into his chair, his face gray. I looked at him, feeling no sense of victory, only a deep, profound exhaustion, because I knew that our 15-year marriage had, at this moment, truly and finally ended. The already tense mediation room grew even heavier after Vance placed David's debt portfolio on the table. The judge examined the documents meticulously. With every page he turned, his expression grew more severe. The court clerk leaned in, eyes widening at the numbers and the red past due stamps on the loan agreements. David sat opposite me, his posture slumped. The defiant man from moments before was gone, replaced by someone with a gray, defeated face. His hands on the table clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Eleanor sat beside her son, her face ashen. David, say something. What is all this? Her voice trembled as if all her strength had been drained. David didn't answer. He just stared at the damning papers in front of the judge. The judge set the file down and looked at David. Mr. Harrison, these loan agreements are all in your name. The total amount exceeds $20 million. Do you have an explanation? David opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lawyer looked equally flustered. He shuffled through his own papers before saying, Your Honor, we will need time to verify these documents. Vance, standing behind us, spoke in a calm, steady voice. I've submitted notarized copies. If the court requires, I can provide the originals. David whipped around to face him. Why are you doing this? His eyes now blazed with undisguised rage. Vance simply shrugged. I'm just providing information. David gave a harsh, dry laugh. You think I don't know what you're after? Vance didn't reply. He just looked at David, his gaze so cold it was unnerving. The judge tapped the table lightly. Order. He turned to me. Miss Harrison, do you have anything to add? I stood up. Your Honor, in addition to the $15 million debt Mr. Harrison signed with me, these other loans prove that his financial situation is extremely unstable. I don't believe he is in a position to provide a stable environment for our son, Ethan. The room was silent. Suddenly, David shot to his feet. Claire! His voice was raw. You think you've won? I looked at him. What are you trying to say? David was breathing heavily, as if struggling to contain something. Then, he said something that shocked everyone. I'm bankrupt. Eleanor gasped. David didn't look at her. He stared directly at me. You wanted Harrison Construction, right? You wanted all my assets. He laughed. A twisted, broken sound. Fine. The room was silent. He continued, his voice suddenly eerily calm. But I won't let you have any peace. I frowned. What are you talking about? David turned to the judge. Your Honor, I am withdrawing my petition for custody. The statement stunned everyone. His own lawyer turned to him. David, you can't make a decision like that right now. David waved him off. I said, I'm withdrawing it. He looked at Ethan. For the first time all day, his expression was different. Ethan. The boy stood up. Yes? David stared at his son for a long, long time. I won't fight your mother for you anymore. The room was silent. Ethan said nothing. I said nothing, but I felt something was wrong. David was not the type to give up so easily. He turned back to me. Claire, You won. I looked at him. What are you going to do? David smiled faintly. Nothing. It's just, from now on, I have nothing left to lose. His words sent a chill down my spine. The judge made a few notes and said, if Mr. Harrison withdraws the petition, the court will proceed with adjudicating the financial matters. David nodded. Fine. He turned and walked toward the door. Eleanor scrambled to her feet. David, where are you going? Without turning back, he said one word. Home. The door to the mediation room closed behind him. The room suddenly felt empty. Mr. Thompson looked at me. Claire, it seems he's given up. I shook my head. No, he's not the type to give up. Vance, still standing behind us, said slowly, You're right. I turned to him. What do you think he'll do? Vance looked at the closed door. People who have lost everything tend to do the most unpredictable things. Ethan stood beside me. Mom, Dad said he has nothing left to lose. I squeezed his hand gently. Don't overthink it. But in my heart, I knew this was far from over. That afternoon, just as Ethan and I arrived back at the condo, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. A man's voice came on the line. Is this Miss Claire Harrison? Yes. This is the Ridgedale City Bank calling. We need to inform you of a transaction. I frowned. What is it? The man spoke slowly. Mr. David Harrison has just withdrawn the entire remaining balance from the Harrison Construction corporate account. I froze. How much? Just under $2 million. My heart began to pound. When did he withdraw it? About an hour ago. I looked out the window. The Ridgedale sky was already growing dark. A cold thought shot through my mind. David had just said he had nothing left to lose, and now he had disappeared with nearly $2 million in cash. I knew with chilling certainty this wasn't over. In fact, it may have just entered its most dangerous phase. That evening, a strong wind blew across Ridgedale, gusting along the river and rattling the windows of the condo, making the curtains sway. I stood on the balcony, my phone still in my hand, my mind reeling from the call from the bank. David had taken nearly $2 million and vanished. A man who had just lost his company, his family, and his reputation, now armed with a large sum of cash, there was no telling what he would do next. I went back into the living room. Ethan was on the sofa, a math textbook open in front of him, but it was clear he wasn't reading. Mom, what did Dad do? I sat down next to him. He took the money and left. Ethan was silent for a few seconds. He'll be back. I looked at him. What makes you say that? He shrugged. He's not the type to just run away. I sighed, softly. He was right. David wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat and disappear quietly. My phone rang. The caller ID was Vance. I answered. Mr. Vance. His voice was deep. I just heard the news. Harrison took the money. You know already. Vance gave a dry laugh. News in Ridgedale travels fast. I asked him directly. What do you think he's planning? There was a pause on his end. I don't know, but you need to be careful. I understood what he meant. A desperate man could do anything. After I hung up, I was about to say something to Ethan when my phone rang again. This time, it was David's number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Ethan saw it. Mom, you should answer. I picked it up. David. The other end was silent for a moment. I could hear the wind howling through the phone. Claire. His voice was hoarse, but strangely calm. Where are you? I asked. He laughed softly. A place you know very well. My heart suddenly beat faster. What do you want? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I want to see you. Now. I gripped the phone tighter. Where? David said slowly. The old mansion. The Harrison family mansion. The place I had lived for 15 years. The place the court had ordered us to vacate in 3 days. You're there? I asked. Yes. He paused, then added, Come alone. I frowned. Why? He laughed. Because I have a son here with me. The word sent a chill through my entire body. What did you say? David spoke very clearly. I picked him up. I spun around to look at Ethan. He was still sitting right next to me. David, are you insane? He was silent. Then he said something that made me understand. I'm talking about the other son. Leo, Jessica's son. I shot to my feet. What did you do to that boy? David laughed again. I didn't do anything to him. He's just here with me. I tried to keep my voice steady. What do you want? He spoke slowly. I want to talk to you. About everything. I looked out the window. Darkness had enveloped the city. Don't do anything stupid. David sighed. Claire, do you think I have any other choice? I was silent. He continued. You, Vance. Everyone backed me into a corner. I just want a chance. A chance for what? I asked. He gave a hollow laugh. A chance to get a little bit of fairness back. I understood what he was thinking. In his mind, everything was my fault. How much money do you want? I asked directly. He laughed. You think I called you for money? I didn't answer. He went on. I just want you to come. If you don't, he paused. Then I can't guarantee what will happen. I clenched the phone. David, do not harm that child. He was silent for a few seconds. I never wanted to harm anyone. His words reminded me of the early years of our marriage. David wasn't like this back then. But people change when they lose everything. I'll be there, I said. He replied immediately. I'll be waiting. The call ended. Ethan stood up. Mom, that was Dad, wasn't it? I nodded. He's at the mansion. Ethan frowned. What does he want? I looked at my son. He has Leo. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. He clenched his fists. I'm going with you. I shook my head. No. You stay here. He shook his head more forcefully. Mom, I'm not letting you go alone. I looked at my son. In his eyes, I no longer saw a 14-year-old boy, but someone ready to face anything. I sighed. All right. I grabbed my coat. Let's go. Outside, the wind was howling. Michael's car sped through the dark streets. Only one thought consumed my mind. David had been pushed to the edge, and people on the edge do the unthinkable. The car stopped in front of the gates of the old Harrison mansion just as the clock neared 10 p.m. I had lived in this house for 15 years. Every corner, every step, every tree in the yard was so familiar that a single glance brought back a flood of memories. But tonight, it felt completely different. The lights were on inside, but the front yard was dark and empty. The iron gate was slightly ajar, creaking eerily in the wind. Michael turned off the engine. Miss Claire, I'm coming with you. I shook my head. You wait outside. Michael hesitated but ultimately nodded. Ethan opened his door and got out first. He stared at the house for a moment, then looked at me. Mom, Dad's in there. I nodded. Let's go. We walked through the gate. The yard was darker than I remembered. The old mango tree by the path was still there, its leaves rustling in the wind. After all these years, the tree remained the same. Only the people had changed. The front door was open. David was standing in the living room, the overhead light casting harsh shadows on his face. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair a mess. On the coffee table, in front of him, was a nearly empty bottle of whiskey. And Leo. The little boy was sitting on the sofa, hugging a pillow, his face etched with fear. When he saw Ethan and me walk in, he immediately stood up. Miss. I hurried over to him. Leo. I looked him over from head to toe. Are you okay? Leo shook his head. I'm okay. I breathed a sigh of relief. David watched us with a faint, bitter smile. You're still the same. I turned to him. Let the boy go. David picked up his glass, took a long swallow, and set it down. I'm not holding him. I just wanted you to come. I pulled Leo behind me. Say what you have to say. David looked at me. His eyes were no longer filled with the anger I'd seen at the courthouse, only a profound exhaustion. Claire, do you remember the first time we came to this house? I didn't answer, but the memory surfaced. We had just gotten married. David had stood with me in front of this brand new mansion, holding my hand, and said this would be where our family would live for the rest of our lives. He gave a sad smile. I remember thinking I could accomplish so much back then. I looked at him. But you destroyed it yourself. David nodded. I did. He sat down heavily. I thought I was smart. I thought I could have my family and another life on the side. He let out a dry, broken laugh. In the end, I lost everything. The room was silent. Ethan stood beside me, not saying a word. David looked at his son. Ethan. The boy met his gaze. Yes? David said very quietly. I'm sorry. Ethan didn't reply immediately. After a moment, he asked, What are you sorry for? David was silent for a few seconds. For disappointing you. Ethan looked at him for a long time, then said, You said I wasn't your son. David lowered his head. I was wrong. I just wanted to hurt your mother. I said nothing. David looked up. Claire, I've been thinking a lot. I wanted to get revenge on you. Wanted to burn everything to the ground. He smiled faintly. But just now, looking at this kid, he gestured to Leo. I suddenly realized the children are not at fault. Leo clutched my sleeve. David continued. I called Jessica. She's on her way to pick him up. I looked at him. Then, why did you call me here? David stood up and walked slowly to a desk. He opened a drawer and took out a folder. He handed it to me. These are transfer documents. I opened it. It was a contract selling all of David's remaining shares in Harrison Construction. The recipient was me. I looked at him. Why are you doing this? David smiled. That company was always held up by you. I was just the one who broke it. He sighed. I have nothing left. I was silent. He turned to Ethan. I don't deserve to be your father. But, he paused. I hope that when you're older, you'll remember that I tried. Ethan looked at him, his eyes no longer angry, only calm. I'll remember. David nodded. Suddenly, we heard a car pull up outside. A moment later, Jessica ran in. She rushed to Leo and hugged him tightly. Are you okay? Leo shook his head. Yes. Jessica looked at me. Miss Claire. I nodded. Take him home? Jessica gave David one last look, then led Leo out of the house. The room fell silent again. David looked around the mansion one final time. I'm leaving Ridgedale tomorrow. Where will you go? I asked. He shrugged. I don't know. Somewhere to start over. He looked at me. Claire. Thank you for loving me once. I didn't answer, because I knew that love was long in the past. David walked to the door. As he passed Ethan, he paused for a second, then just gave a slight nod and left. The front door closed, and the sound of his footsteps faded away. The mansion was quiet once more. Ethan stood beside me. Mom, will Dad be okay? I looked out at the yard. The wind was still blowing through the trees. I don't know, Ethan, but everyone has to take responsibility for their own choices. He nodded. Mother and son, we walked out of the house. In the Ridgedale sky, the clouds had parted. The moonlight shone down, soft and clear. I took my son's hand. 15 years of marriage had ended in one night. But from that night, a new life began. No more lies, no more enduring. Just my son and me, and the road ahead. Dear listeners, as this story comes to a close, many of us are likely left with a mix of emotions. This isn't just a story about a broken marriage, but a long journey of eroded trust, silent suffering, and ultimately, a powerful awakening. I think what is most thought-provoking is not who was right or wrong, but how each character chose to face the crisis. The husband, driven by greed and selfishness, single-handedly lost his family. The mother-in-law, bound by an antiquated preference for male heirs, enabled his mistakes. And the wife, our protagonist, chose quiet resilience, gathering her strength until she could stand up for herself with dignity, not with noise, but with undeniable competence. There's a profound lesson here. In family life, betrayal doesn't always start with grand gestures. It often begins with small acts of disrespect, with the assumption that your partner doesn't know, or that they will simply endure it forever. But it's precisely that assumption that plants the seeds for destruction. To anyone listening who is a husband or a wife, I want to say this. Marriage is not a contest to test each other's tolerance. Don't think that because your partner is kind, you can hurt them again and again. Because one day, when they stop talking, when they stop arguing, that is the moment they are preparing to leave for good. For the parents and grandparents out there, this story is also a reminder. Don't let old prejudices harm your own family. A child is not a tool for carrying on a family name or for keeping up appearances. A child raised with kindness and love, whether a boy or a girl, deserves to be cherished. I was also deeply impressed by the son in this story. At 14, he was clear-eyed enough to see right from wrong and brave enough to protect his mother. It shows us that children are not as naive as we think. They observe, they remember, and they feel everything. Therefore, the way we as adults live our lives is the greatest lesson we can ever teach them. If I could send a message to the woman in this story, I would just want to say, you did the right thing. Not because you won, but because you chose to preserve your self-worth. Life can hand us many losses, but as long as we hold on to our own value, there is always a chance to start anew. As for the man in the story, the price he paid wasn't just money or reputation, but a future of loneliness. Some mistakes cannot be undone with a simple apology. Dear listeners, there are many stories like this one playing out in the world around us, each with its own circumstances and its own choices. If you have gone through something similar, or are facing a difficult situation yourself, please don't hesitate to share it with us. Send your letters to our program. and let's listen and reflect together. Who knows? Your story might just help someone else find their own way forward. If today's story resonated with you, please consider supporting our channel by following, sharing, and leaving your thoughts in the comments. Every bit of your engagement gives us the motivation to continue bringing you stories that are real, relatable, and deeply human. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.